When I heard a child's voice deeper in the thicket, my vision dimmed with fear because I realized she was alone and the dogs were close. I had been walking the old sap trail, one hand still sticky from tapping the birches, when that thin, startled cry cut through the hush of early spring woods. I stopped mid-step, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. Dead leaves crackled under my boot, and for a breath I thought the sound I'd heard was a woodpecker or some trick of wind. Then the voice came again, higher now, trembling. A child, too far from any house. I stepped forward, pushing low branches aside, trying to keep quiet, even though the pulse in my throat sounded like an axe against bark. 30 paces in, the ground opened into a mossy clearing. That's when I saw them. 6 feral dogs, big, rangy, patch-furred things, had formed a ragged ring around a little girl no older than 7. She wore a red wool coat that looked heavy on her tiny frame. Mud stained her knees. Her hands were lifted as if she might push the air itself away. One dog barked, sharp and cruel. Another snapped at nothing, hyping the pack. I froze, not because I didn't want to help, but because a single step from me could trigger their charge. I've dealt with packs before. They're fast and they're mean, and if they smell weakness, they rush. I scanned the ground for anything, a branch, a rock, anything bigger than fear, but every choice felt useless. The girl's eyes flicked toward me for half a second. In that instant, I tasted iron. I knew I could never reach her in time. The largest dog lunged forward. Its teeth flashed, catching a shred of the child's coat. She shrieked, and that sound cracked something inside me. I drew breath to shout, to be a decoy, to be anything, but before a word left my mouth, the entire forest seemed to inhale. From the shadows behind a cedar trunk, a lone wolf stepped into the clearing. He wasn't running, he wasn't snarling. He paced, slow and deliberate, muscles flowing under a coat the color of dusk. He walked as though he knew whom he was saving. The dogs felt him before they saw him, their bodies stiffened, heads turning in the same stunned rotation. The big one dropped the strip of red fabric and let out a low, confused growl. I watched it all in a heartbeat so sharp it sliced time. The girl spun, the wolf kept advancing, and somehow every creature present understood that the balance had shifted. I expected chaos, snapping, blood, the frenzy that comes when rival predators meet. Instead, the wolf halted 3 strides from the ring, lifted his head, and looked each dog in the eye. Not a sound left his throat. No raised hackles, no flashing fangs, just that gaze, steady as granite. One by one, the dogs edged backward, tails tucking, their bravado deflating like wet paper. For a second, I almost laughed at the madness of it. A lone wolf facing 6 dogs, and they were the ones losing nerve. But the laugh died because I saw something else in the wolf's eyes. Purpose. It was as if he carried a message older than paths and fences. She belongs under my watch, not yours. 2 dogs broke first, slipping into the underbrush. The others followed in a reluctant ripple until only the big male remained. He took a final half step forward, growled, then startled as the wolf simply stepped closer, silent, unhurried. The dog's defiance shattered. He turned tail and vanished, crashing through bracken so fast the branches whipped behind him. I released the breath I'd been hoarding. My knees sagged. I thought the worst was over, that the miracle had been delivered, and the danger was gone. But the wolf stayed. He turned from the retreating pack and faced the girl. She stood motionless, lips parted, eyes wide and shining. A breeze lifted her hair. I saw goose flesh rise on her neck. The wolf's ears flattened for an instant, almost a nod, and then he took a single step toward her, slow enough for her to refuse if she wished. She didn't. Instead, she lowered her trembling hands and whispered something I couldn't hear. The wolf eased closer until his nose almost touched the ragged tear in her coat. He sniffed, exhaled, then sat, planting himself like a sentinel before a gate. The girl's shoulders dropped. The terror that had frozen her melted into a fragile calm. She reached out, fingers brushing his fur, and the wolf closed his eyes, as if that tiny touch mattered more than the whole wild world. The clearing felt suddenly smaller, as though time itself leaned into witness. I took a step, meaning to approach, to gather the child, to thank whatever power ruled these woods. The wolf's gaze flicked to me, alert, unreadable, not a threat, not a plea, just a silent reminder that this moment, for now, was his to guard. My foot hung in midair. I let it settle without noise. I didn't dare disrupt the impossible. Somewhere beyond the pines, the wind shifted, carrying the distant drone of a farm truck. The wolf's ears twitched, but he kept his post. The girl rested her palm fully against his shoulder, and I felt tears sting the backs of my eyes. I hadn't realized I was holding them. I wanted to believe the story ended there, that the menace was gone, the child was safe, and the world had shown its mercy in a single stroke. I wanted to turn back to the trail with that tidy conclusion tied like ribbon around the day. If only I'd known this was nothing but the opening beat. The smallest tremor before the earth itself would move beneath us. The clearing held its breath. The wolf sat beside the girl, tail wrapped around his paws, chest rising in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The dogs hovered at the edge of the trees, a ragged half-circle of twitching flanks and flattened ears, unsure whether to charge or flee. The wolf never bared a tooth. Instead, he fixed them with a stare so heavy I could almost hear it landing. A low, pulsing growl washed out of him, not loud, not frantic, but deep enough to rattle my ribs. The pack felt it first. One brown mongrel edged backward, claws scraping bark-littered ground. Another shifted its weight, lip curling before collapsing into nervous panting. They weren't facing teeth, they were facing confidence, an ancient certainty that needed no violence to prove itself. The wolf's eyes swept across the line, command without motion, judgment without blood. Each dog read the verdict and shrank. The girl stood frozen, small hands fisted in the fabric of her coat, yet there was no sound from her, not a sob, not a whimper. The silence made everything louder, the drumming in my ears, the click of a twig beneath a dog's paw, the soft hiss of the wolf's breath. I took a single step forward, instinct screaming to scoop her up and run, but another instinct, older, wilder, stopped me cold. I knew that if I interfered, I would break whatever sacred thread was strung between predator and child. I'd spent a lifetime believing the forest could be managed, charted, mapped. In that moment, it felt like a cathedral, and I was an intruder. The wolf lifted his muzzle, and the growl ceased. A hush dropped so heavy, I almost staggered under it. For a heartbeat, everything seemed balanced on the razor of that stillness. My chest loosened. Relief began to trickle in. I thought it was over. Then the wolf stood. Not rushed, not bristling. Simply rose to full height, shoulders rolling, ears spearing forward. He took one deliberate stride toward the nearest dog. The animal flinched as though struck, then bolted sideways into brush. The others broke formation like shards of glass in slow motion, scrambling to stay outside an invisible circle that expanded with every measured step of the wolf. He herded them without touching a single hide, pushing along a path only he could see, never quickening, never breaking the calm. One brindled cur spun and snapped at him in a last flash of bravado. The wolf's response was a single guttering rumble, half earthquake, half whispered warning. The dog's tail tucked so tight it grazed its belly. It barreled after its companions, crashing through ferns. Another, the limping black that had first lunged at the girl, tried to stand its ground longer than pride allowed. The wolf angled his head, eyes narrowing, and took a solitary pace forward. No contact, no fight, just presence. The black dog crumbled, slinking away until distance swallowed it whole. Within moments, the clearing emptied of everything that had meant harm. All that remained were trembling leaves and the faint stink of fear drifting after the retreat. The wolf watched the last dog disappear, ears still pricked, as if waiting to be sure the lesson had taken root. Only then did he exhale, one slow breath that fogged the cool air, and lower his head toward the girl. She never moved. Her eyes were wide, but they held none of the glassy panic I'd feared. Instead, I saw wonder, a dawning recognition, as though she were meeting a friend whose face she'd known only in dreams. The wolf nudged the torn edge of her coat, sniffed, and let out a sound so soft it barely existed, something between a sigh and a lullaby. The tension in my spine uncoiled, and with it came a jolt of awe so fierce my vision blurred. I wanted to step in then, to claim the child, to thank the animal, to do something, but my boots felt welded to the ground. The wolf's gaze flicked to me, calm, yet absolute. Not yet. He turned back to the girl, sat once more, and settled beside her as if resuming an age-old post. She reached down, touched the fur at his shoulder, and the forest seemed to bend closer to listen. A robin burst from an alder, startling both of us, but the wolf barely twitched. The girl finally drew a shuddering breath and whispered words I couldn't catch. The wolf's ears rotated, absorbing every syllable like commandments. He answered with a gentle thrum in his chest, the vibration carrying farther than any bark. I stood there, helpless witness to an accord I had no language for. I'd seen treaties signed between men with less gravity than this silent pact. Reason told me it was coincidence, territorial display, animal instinct. But reason sounded thin against the pulse of what I'd felt. Reverence, unmistakable and raw. The breeze shifted, bringing the smell of thawed earth and something metallic, blood that never spilled. The girl's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of those unseen jaws finally lifted. The wolf scanned the tree line once more, ensuring the danger had truly fled. Satisfied, he lay down at her feet, head between paws, eyes on the shadows where the dogs had vanished. I found my voice at last, rough and cracked. "Are you hurt?" I asked. The girl shook her head without looking away from her guardian. Relief flooded me, but it rode on a current of disbelief so strong I nearly laughed. Minutes ago I'd expected to witness horror. Now I was looking at a tableau of impossible grace. Some part of me wanted to call the moment finished, to stamp it closed and file it under miracles owed. Yet even as the thought formed, the wolf's ears twitched as though he'd heard it and refused. There was more, something still coiled beneath the quiet, waiting to strike wonder deeper. I didn't know what or when, only that I was standing on the threshold of a story that wasn't ready to let me go. The wolf rose from his crouch, dew-dark fur whispering as it brushed the girl's sleeve. I expected a wild creature's wariness, a freeze, a toss of the head, but he stepped close enough that the steam of her breath mingled with his. She lifted her hand, fingers trembling not with fear but anticipation, and set her palm on the thick ruff at his neck. I swear I heard the sigh leave him. His shoulders loosened, spine lowering a fraction so she didn't need to reach. One slow stroke from her tiny wrist to the point of his shoulder, and every muscle in his body settled, as though she'd unlatched some hidden gate inside him. My own knees went weak. I had broken and trained dogs my whole life. But this was communion, not obedience. She looked over her shoulder at me, eyes bright as river stones. "It's him," she breathed, voice soft yet certain. "He's always with me in my dreams." The words landed like a stone in still water, spreading rings that shook every ordinary thing loose from its mooring. I opened my mouth to answer, ask which dreams, how often, why, but nothing came out. Questions seemed vulgar against the hush forming around them. All I could do was watch while the impossible rearranged the rules I'd carried my whole life. The wolf turned his head and licked a smear of dried mud from the girl's cheek. She giggled, an easing, innocent sound, and the forest, raw from the earlier terror, dared to breathe again. A red squirrel scuttled across a branch overhead, paused, then dashed on, emboldened by the calm. The wolf shifted, settling his weight onto his forelegs, and the girl used that motion to kneel beside him. She pressed her face into the curve where rib met flank, small arms wrapping as far as they could go. For a heartbeat, I braced for the instinctive snap, the correction every canine gives when pinned. Instead, the wolf's eyes slid half shut, and he let the full length of himself relax beneath her touch. He let her lay her head on him as though he were her father. That sight punched the air from my lungs. I'd seen mercy in animals and flashes of what looked like love, but never surrender, not like this, not from a predator whose survival depended on vigilance. My throat tightened so hard I had to steady myself on a birch trunk slick with sap. Bark grated my palm, real, reassuring pain, but nothing in my body felt anchored. I was floating somewhere outside logic, tethered only by the hiss of wind through dead grass. The girl's voice floated up, muffled against the wolf's side. He came when Mama left, in the dark places. He said I'd never be alone. A pause. Her fingers tightened in his fur. I told him today felt heavy. He said he'd meet me where the trees open. A chill rolled down my spine, not cold, but electric. I thought of her wandering from the village, of those dogs closing in, and wondered which message, dream or instinct, had guided her feet. My pulse hammered with a question I couldn't form. Who is he to you? I took one hesitant step forward, boots crunching in last year's oak leaves. The wolf's ear flicked toward me, no more than a twig brushing silk, yet I froze. His gaze lifted, calm and unwavering. Not a challenge, an assessment. Could I be trusted with the closeness he had granted the child? I kept my movements slow, palms open. The forest felt like an ancient courtroom, and he was the only judge that mattered. At last he blinked, a deliberate measured closing of lids, and turned his attention back to the girl, verdict delivered without cruelty. Remain, but remember your place. I exhaled, a shuddering breath I hadn't meant to hold. Minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the distant groan of thawing ice along a stream. The girl traced patterns in the wolf's fur, speaking to him in half-lidded whispers I couldn't catch. With every word, he softened, breathing deep as if drawing her grief out with the air. I thought maybe this was the gift, a singular moment of comfort for a motherless child, witnessed by one astonished old man. Part of me already began to sculpt the story I'd tell, how courage wears fur, how broken hearts find guardians in shadows. I thought the miracle had blossomed fully, that there was nothing left to unfold, but the wolf's ears snapped forward, nose lifting to a wind I couldn't feel. His body coiled, not in fear but in focus, as though he'd sensed a script still waiting in the wings. The girl felt it too. She sat up, eyes seeking the thicket beyond the birches. Something else was coming, something neither of them intended to face alone. I forced my boots to move, one step, then another, careful not to crack a branch too loud or breathe too hard. The clearing felt sacred, and every careless sound might snap the thread holding this wonder together. When I was a dozen paces away, the wolf lifted his head and fixed me with a stare that traveled straight through skin and bone to whatever place inside a man keeps secrets. No hackles rose, no lips curled. His gold-flecked eyes held neither threat nor welcome, only a calm appraisal, as if he needed to weigh the worth of my presence. I stopped, palms open, the way I would greet an old friend's wary horse. My heartbeat thudded somewhere in my neck. The girl sat back on her heels and turned to me. Her cheeks were flushed, not from cold, but from the sort of fevered relief that follows a nightmare ending mid-scream. She touched the wolf's shoulder, fingers sinking into fur. "He came just like before," she said, voice small but steady, "like the night Mama left." My breath snagged. I knelt slowly, letting my knees sink into thaw-soft moss until my eyes were level with hers. "Your mother, she's gone?" She nodded, strands of hair slipping across her face. 2 months. The doctor said her heart stopped while she slept. Grandma cries when she thinks I'm not listening. She brushed her sleeve over her nose. "But she stroked the wolf's neck. "He found me that first night, in my room, in my dream. He said if I ever felt lost, I should meet him where the trees opened to the sky." The wolf's gaze never left mine. A breeze teased the tips of his fur. Light shifted, and for an instant, I saw my own reflection in those eyes. Older, grayer, carrying grief I'd never voiced. Something inside me tilted. I remembered news from the village store, an obituary on the corkboard, a photo of a young woman with the same dark hair now hanging over this child's collar. I'd glanced at it while buying salt blocks, felt a pang, moved on. Now the obituary had hands and a heartbeat beside me. "My name's Nora," the girl added, almost as an afterthought. "Grandma let me walk near the edge of the orchard today. I followed the path because the wind felt like him." She shrugged, struggling for words bigger than her years. I swallowed. "I'm Tomas," I said, voice hoarse. "I live half a mile that way. I worked these woods before you were born." I looked at the wolf. I thought I knew every law that ruled them. The wolf blinked slowly, as though acknowledging a truth too obvious to speak. "You don't know the half." Nora rose and brushed debris from her coat. The wolf rose with her, flank brushing her hip protectively. I saw no tension in the line of his body, only a readiness, a promise to match her steps wherever they led. A sudden notion struck me. 20 years ago, almost to the month, I'd freed a silver-gray she-wolf from a wire snare along this ridge. She'd been bleeding, leg mangled. I spent half the night sawing that cursed wire and whispering stupid comforts. When she limped off, I figured the debt was settled. But the eyes I faced now, darker, yes, and lined by age, held the same curious steadiness I'd seen in her while I worked. The resemblance hammered at memory until it rang. Nora tugged the sleeve of my flannel. "Can we walk home now? Grandma worries when the sun tilts." "Of course." I turned, half expecting the wolf to vanish into shadow. Instead, he eased to Nora's left side, matching her stride like a seasoned trail dog, except every inch of him spoke of mountains, not porches. We stepped beneath the reaching arms of birch and cedar. My mind scrambled for an explanation simple enough to keep the world intact. An unusually calm wolf, a child's vivid dreams, my long-ago kindness echoing in bloodlines. Maybe chance wove it all. I thought, maybe it was coincidence. But the wolf glanced back at me, eyes gleaming with something deeper than luck, and the certainty of coincidence crumbled like rotwood under boot heel. Some pattern older than reason pulsed between every footfall. I felt it building, gathering weight, as if the forest itself were holding its breath for the next impossible turn. We followed the thinning path until the orchard's bare branches came into view, silhouettes against a sky washed gold by a late afternoon sun. Halfway there, Nora stopped. Without a word, she reached beneath her coat collar and drew out a small pewter pendant hanging from a frayed blue ribbon. The design was weather-softened, but I saw a wolf's head etched in clean, deliberate lines, ears pricked, eyes forward, almost alive. "She gave it to me on my last birthday," Nora said, thumb rubbing the metal bright. "Mama said, 'This wolf will always walk beside you, even when you're too sad to see him.'" The ribbon trembled between her fingers. The real wolf, standing at her knee, leaned in to sniff the charm. His whiskers brushed the pewter, and he exhaled through his nose, one gentle gust that made the pendant spin. It caught a shard of sunlight and flashed across his face. His eyes narrowed, not in irritation, but in, there's no other word, recognition. Something in that tiny object meant as much to him as it did to her. My skin prickled. 20 years peeled back like bark. I remembered a night thick with snowmelt when a ranger's flashlight swept across steel and blood 5 ridges north of here. A she-wolf, silver as moonwash, lay twisted in a wire snare meant for coyotes. Most trappers would have finished the job. I knelt instead, numb fingers working plico cutters while she watched me with those same ember eyes, pain blazing but hatred absent. When the wire finally snapped free and she dragged herself upright, she paused, just long enough for one slow breath between us, then vanished into fur shadows. I'd told no one. The story had felt too fragile, like a glass secret that would shatter under someone else's disbelief. Yet standing here, watching Nora's guardian touch nose to pendant, I tasted the pine-sting air from that winter night, as if no years had passed. Could this be her son? Grandson? Wolves live fierce, short lives. 2 decades stretch across many generations. But the weight in his gaze said something wilder. The memory itself had survived. A lineage of gratitude carried forward in marrow and muscle until it gazed out at me now. Nora tucked the pendant back under her coat, unaware of the storm inside my chest. She pressed her cheek to the wolf's shoulder. "He likes it when it shines," she murmured. The wolf closed his eyes, a rumble vibrating through his ribs. Pleasure or agreement, I couldn't tell. Then, as though jolted by a private cue, he straightened and scanned the orchard's fringe. His body went alert, soft, not rigid, but tuned, like a violin string drawn taut for the first note. I heard nothing, saw nothing, yet his posture said something approaches. I knelt beside Nora, hand hovering near her elbow. "Your grandmother will be looking for you," I whispered. "Let's keep moving." She nodded, but her gaze flicked to the wolf for permission. He glanced back, throat easing, and padded ahead, slow enough for her short strides. We cut between rows of apple trunks, last year's leaves rustling under our feet. Each time the pendant bumped Nora's chest, it chimed faintly against a coat button, and every time the wolf's ear twitched toward the sound, as if each strike of metal spelled a word only he could read. I dared to close the distance between us. "Nora," I said, voice lower than wind through dry grass, "did your mother ever tell you where that wolf came from? The one on your charm?" "She said he belonged to the forest before I was born," she answered without hesitation. "She said someone saved him once, and because of that, he saves others now." My throat tightened so hard I had to swallow twice. I thought maybe that explained everything, wrapped the riddle in a neat circle. Gratitude repaid, a favor echoed across decades. But as the orchard thinned and the first chimney of the village came into sight, the wolf halted, head cocked to the north. His muscles bunched, ready to move, yet he stayed, tethered by Nora's nearness, or by something even deeper. The sky shifted, the gold gone copper, as though dusk itself leaned closer to eavesdrop. The pendant chimed once more, the wolf's gaze swung back to mine, and in that molten light I saw, unmistakably, the memory of cold steel, of hands that bled freeing flesh. He knew me, and suddenly the tidy circle felt too small for the power humming through the air. I realized the story I'd carried for 20 years was unfinished, merely the first scratch of flint before the real fire. The 3 of us crossed the last strip of orchard and stepped onto the rutted lane that coils toward the village. Evening painted the road in copper and violet, and the first house lights flickered behind bare lilac bushes. The wolf matched our pace, shoulders rolling like slow surf, paws silent on packed dirt. With every yard the scent of wood smoke strengthened, and I waited for him to peel away, back to moss and shadow where his kind belongs. Instead, he kept beside Nora, flank brushing her coat whenever the ribbon of her pendant swung too wide. I realized we weren't leading him. He was escorting us, the way an older brother sees a sister to the door after curfew. A rooster crowed somewhere, late, confused, and a dog barked 2 streets over. The wolf's ears flicked, but he showed no hurry, no unease. A woman at a window across the field glanced up, caught sight of our procession, and froze with lace curtains balled in her fists. I raised a hand, more apology than greeting. She didn't wave back, yet she didn't scream either. Something in the calm weight of the wolf's stride seemed to mute panic before it could find a throat. Nora hummed a little tune, aimless, wandering, almost as if she were leading a pony. Every few steps she looked up and grinned at him, and every time his tail gave one slow sweep that dusted the road, I followed a pace behind, marveling at how fear had evaporated, replaced by the hush that fills a church long after the choir has gone. At the bend where the lane meets Main Street, the wolf stopped. It was the precise spot where apple trees give way to clapboard fences, where wilderness ends and the map begins. He turned sideways, gently herding Nora forward with a chest-high press that nudged but never pushed. She took 2 reluctant steps, then halted and faced him. "Thank you," she whispered, voice raw with all the words too big for 7-year-old lungs. She raised a mittened hand and wiggled her fingers in farewell. The wolf did something I will argue about with myself until the day I die. He looked straight at her and, there is no other description, he nodded. A single, deliberate dip of his great head, crisp as a bow from a gentleman. He nodded, like a man. I saw it. I will never forget it. My heart punched my ribs so hard I heard blood in my ears. For a beat, the whole world balanced on that impossible gesture. The orchard behind us, the village ahead, dusk trembling with secrets. Nora's face lit as though a lantern flared inside her. She clutched the pendant beneath her coat and whispered, "See? He does remember." Then the wolf swung his gaze to me, a breath held, eyes meeting eyes. I wanted to speak, thanks, apology, promise, prayer, but the words scattered like startled sparrows, so I simply inclined my head, echoing the honor he had shown. He blinked once, slow. Decision made. Without a sound, he pivoted, trotted back the way we'd come, and slipped between the orchard trunks. No rustle, no snap of twig, just a gray shadow melting into deeper gray until nothing remained but the faint shiver of branches settling behind him. Nora's shoulders sagged, part relief, part sudden weight of goodbye. She looked up at me. "Grandma's house is 2 streets," she said, as if the world had not just bent its own rules to keep her alive. I offered my hand. She took it, small fingers warm through wool. Halfway to the porch light, I glanced over my shoulder, hunting any shape that might be a wolf watching from tree line. Empty lane, empty orchard. The sky had swallowed him as neatly as dusk swallows color from old fence boards. I tried to convince myself that was the conclusion, that the guardian had delivered his charge and reclaimed the dark. Yet the image of that nod burned behind my eyes, a silent vow that the story wasn't finished, only folded. Somewhere beyond the orchard, paws still patted ancient soil, carrying memory older than maps, older than fear. And though I could no longer see him, I felt the weight of his gaze on the back of my heart, as if the forest itself had promised. Keep the child safe, keep the secret alive, for the wild is not done speaking. Grandma's porch light glowed amber against the coming dark, warming the clapboard like a coal in a hearth. We climbed the steps, Nora's hand still cupped inside mine, steady, not trembling at all. The hush that fell after the wolf's departure clung to her like a shawl of calm. No fevered shiver, no shock-tight jaw, only a settled silence, as though a long argument inside her had reached its answer. Grandma Mason opened the door with a rush of stew-scented air. She all but flew down the steps, robe flapping, gray hair escaping its knot. Child, where have you—" She stopped short when she saw the smear on Nora's torn coat and the strange serenity in her eyes. I eased forward, palms raised, preparing 1,000 explanations that sounded thin even to me. Before I spoke, Nora laid a finger to her own chest. "He's here now, Grandma," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "Right here, in my heart." She tapped twice, as if making sure the pulse stayed steady. Grandma's gaze slid to mine, asking more questions than lips could form. I told her, halting, embarrassed, stunned, about the clearing, the dogs, the lone wolf standing guard. As the words tumbled out, tears welled behind her old glass eyes. She lifted a hand as if to stop me, but let it drop to her apron instead. When I finished, silence settled over the porch, thicker than before. Somewhere far beyond the garden fence, a whip-poor-will called, lonely and sweet. Grandma pressed a palm to her mouth, fighting breath, then gathered Nora to her chest. "Your mama saw him too," she whispered into the child's hair. Nora leaned back. "When she was little?" Grandma nodded, tears slipping free. She'd wake saying there was a gray wolf by her window. Said he told her not to fear the dark. I thought it a dream, a comfort she invented after her own daddy died. Her shoulders shook once, ribs heaving. She never let the story go. The porch boards creaked under my shift of weight. A chill crawled my spine, the hum of generations stretching claw-tip to claw-tip across time. The woman I'd freed in wire 20 years ago, had she already been carrying the memory of my hands? Had that memory bled into her pups and theirs, until one had stepped from legend to shield a second-generation child? The notion bent every rule of learned nature, yet the logic of awe felt sturdier than any textbook. Nora turned the pendant in her fingers, pewter wolf gleaming in the porch light. "Mama said the forest keeps promises," she murmured. "People forget, but the forest never does." The words struck like a bell in hollow bone. He nodded, like a man. I had seen it. I would never forget. My knees weakened at the echo, looping back on itself. Kindness given, kindness carried, kindness returned in flesh and fur. I pressed a fist to my sternum, the beat beneath it rattling like trapped wings. Grandma eased Nora indoors, but paused at the threshold to face me. "Stay," she said, voice shaky but firm. "Tell me everything again, slowly." We sat at the kitchen table, oilcloth soft with age, while the child curled on a settee drinking honeyed milk. I recounted each impossible moment, from the first growl that pinned 6 savage dogs to the final nod that broke my concept of the wild. Grandma listened, tears shining but unshed, palms open on the table like empty bowls waiting for rain. When I finished, she reached across and gripped my wrist. "Do you see?" she whispered. "Whatever you did that night in the snow, you planted hope in a bloodline. It found my daughter, now finds my granddaughter." I tried to protest, chance, coincidence, roaming instincts, but the arguments folded on themselves, paper birds too weak to fly. I thought it was just a child's fantasy. The sentence died unspoken, because fantasy doesn't leave fang marks in mud or hush a pack of feral dogs without spilling blood. A log in the stove snapped, showering sparks behind the grate. At that same instant, through the cracked window above the sink, a distant, singular howl threaded the night. Not the frantic chorus of a hunting pack, but a lone, steady note. Solemn, sure. It drifted over orchard and field, slipped through the screens, and settled in our chests like a secret vow. Nora lifted her head, eyes shining. "He's telling me good night," she whispered. She pressed the pendant to her lips, then tucked it beneath her collar, as though sealing a promise. Grandma squeezed my hand. The howl ebbed into silence, leaving our ears ringing with its afterglow. None of us spoke. Language felt clumsy beside that raw, perfect sound. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of damp earth and apple bark. I stared at the dark pane, seeing nothing but feeling watched in the gentlest way, monitored by something vast and tender that regarded our frail walls and chose for now to let them stand. The stove ticked, the house breathed, and somewhere beyond the orchard, paws pressed loam, bearing memories older than grief, older than names, pacing a border I could no longer pretend was marked in miles alone. At dawn on the third day, I could no longer sit inside four walls. The house felt too small for the questions crowding my ribs, so I took the old sap trail back toward the clearing, boots crunching through frost-stiff leaves. The air smelled of cedar smoke from breakfast stoves, but as soon as the village dropped behind me, I tasted raw moss and cold stone, the forest's own breath, unfiltered. I walked slower than usual, half afraid to break whatever thin thread still tied me to that night. When the birches opened, the clearing waited exactly as we had left it. Furrows where the dogs had circled, my own footprints faded by wind, the moss pressed flat where Nora had knelt. Nothing moved, yet the place felt occupied, like a room where someone has just stepped out. I let my gaze sweep the ground, searching for any sign he might have left. At the far edge, near a fallen cedar, a single paw print sat flawless in soft earth, one track only, as though he had planted it on purpose. The pad impressions were sharp, claws lightly etched, no smudge of hurry. I crouched and laid my palm beside it. The size still stunned me. A glint of color tugged my eye. 2 feet beyond the print, half buried in lichen, lay a thin strip of red ribbon. I knew that ribbon. It had edged the tear in Nora's coat where the biggest dog had snapped. I had watched it flutter as we walked home, yet here it was, scarlet against green, dry as if the night dew had skipped over it. I turned a slow circle, coat cracking at the shoulders. How had the ribbon traveled back to this place without the coat around it? The trees answered with silence. A jay somewhere called once, then hushed. The stillness carried a weight that pressed on my lungs. I pocketed the ribbon, then rested my hand on the paw print, feeling the chilled soil as if touch alone might steal a memory from it. That was when the howl rose. It came from the ridge beyond the cedar line, a single note, deep and sure, neither frantic nor mournful. The sound poured over the clearing, rolled through my bones, and hung in the sky like a held breath. I stood, throat tight, eyes burning. The howl held steady for a long heartbeat, then dropped away, leaving the forest ringing with its echo. He was saying goodbye, or thank you. I'm not sure, but I stood there and cried. Tears blurred the trees into watercolor shapes. I did not wipe them. The forest had been witness to my fear, my pride, my small acts of mercy. It could bear this soft surrender too. I whispered something, maybe his name, though I never knew it, and the wind answered by lifting the ribbon in my fist like a tiny red flag. If your heart is trembling right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we share the truths we've forgotten, that nature can love. The howl did not return. I waited a while longer, then followed my own tracks back toward town, one boot sliding into the next print as if I could walk myself out of a dream. I reached my porch before noon, hung my coat, and sat at the kitchen table without lighting the stove. For 3 whole days I spoke to no one. Not to the mailman who brought seed catalogs, not to the neighbor asking about fence wire, not even to Grandma Mason when she knocked to return a borrowed spade. Words felt too brittle. I feared they would crumble and leave only noise. I kept the ribbon on the mantel, red bright against weathered wood. Sometimes I pressed it to my chest, feeling for a pulse that wasn't mine. Tonight, at last, I choose to break the silence, but only here, with you, because stories like this cannot live inside one heart forever. They need another heartbeat to echo in, another pair of eyes willing to believe what claws and paws and quiet loyalty can do. If you too believe animals are capable of more than we understand, write, "We are not alone in this world.